The final years of the 18th century in Richmond, Virginia, were a time of profound and violent contradiction. The air, thick with the smoke of foundries and the scent of the James River, still seemed to carry the echoes of the American Revolution. The words liberty and death had been famously entwined by the patriot Patrick Henry just a few decades earlier. Concepts that had secured freedom for a new nation, but had deliberately excluded nearly half of its population. For the enslaved men and women who constituted the very economic foundation of Virginia, these ideals were a taunt, a promise unfulfilled. It was in this cauldron of revolutionary rhetoric and brutal oppression that a man named Gabriel was forged, a figure whose intellect and ambition would soon threaten to shatter the slaveholding society that created him. Gabriel was born into bondage in 1776, the same year the American colonies declared their independence, on Thomas Prosser's Brookfield plantation in Henrico County. He was not destined for the anonymous drudgery of the tobacco fields. From a young age, he and his brother Solomon were trained as blacksmiths, a skilled trade that placed them in a unique position within the enslaved community. Gabriel grew into an imposing physical specimen, standing 6 feet 2 or 3 inches tall, with a powerful muscular frame honed by years of working with metal. His intelligence was as notable as his physique. In an era where literacy among the enslaved was deliberately suppressed, hovering at a mere 5%, Gabriel had been taught to read and write. This combination of physical power, skilled craftsmanship, and literacy made him a natural leader, respected by both the young and the old among his peers. His owner, Thomas Henry Prosser, who took over the plantation after his father's death in 1798, was a cruel and ambitious man who practiced the common but perilous system of hiring out. This meant that Gabriel, while still legally property, could be rented out to work in foundries and workshops in Richmond. He was allowed to keep a small portion of his earnings, with the bulk going to Prosser, and most importantly, he was granted a significant degree of mobility. This quasi-freedom brought him into daily contact with a diverse and volatile cross-section of Richmond society. He worked alongside free blacks who had managed to carve out a precarious existence as small business owners, white artisans and laborers who resented the economic competition from enslaved skilled workers, and sailors and dock workers of all races who brought news from the wider world. In the grog shops and on the street corners of Richmond, where the racial boundaries were sometimes blurred by class solidarity, Gabriel absorbed powerful, radical ideas. 2 external forces electrified this environment. The first was the ongoing Haitian Revolution. Beginning in 1791, enslaved Africans in the French colony of Saint-Domingue had risen up, and by the late 1790s, they were on the verge of establishing the first Black Republic in the Americas. White Virginians watched in terror as slaveholders and their human property fled the Caribbean, bringing with them horrifying tales of uprising. For the enslaved, however, Haiti was a beacon, a living proof that a rebellion against a powerful slave-owning class could succeed. The second force was the bitter political division in the United States itself. The quasi-war with France and the vicious presidential campaign of 1800 between the Federalist John Adams and the Democratic Republican Thomas Jefferson created an atmosphere of intense political anxiety. For a strategist like Gabriel, this national disunity, combined with the mustering out of a federal regiment stationed near Richmond in June of 1800, appeared to be a moment of unique vulnerability for the Virginia elite. The stage was set, and the actors were in place. All that was needed was a catalyst to transform simmering discontent into a firestorm of rebellion. That catalyst would come from a personal act of defiance that showed Gabriel the brutal cost of submission. The revolutionary ideals of America and the stunning success of the Haitian Revolt have converged on the streets of Richmond. Gabriel, a literate and skilled blacksmith, has seen a vision of a different future, but the path to freedom is paved with unimaginable risk. The planning for one of the most ambitious slave conspiracies in American history is about to begin in the shadows. To uncover the secret meetings and the audacious strategy devised to seize the capital of Virginia, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a moment of the chilling revelation. During the spring and summer of 1800, in the secluded areas north of Richmond, in the shade of bridges, near quiet springs, and under the cover of religious gatherings, a shadow army began to form. The conspiracy did not emerge from a single mind, but was the product of a collective desperation, first proposed by an enslaved man named Sam Bird, Jr. However, it was Gabriel, with his commanding presence, sharp intellect, and extensive network of contacts, who quickly emerged as its central leader and strategic mind. He was joined by a cadre of determined lieutenants, the formidable Jack Bowler, also known as Jack Ditcher, the recruiters Ben Woolfolk and George Smith, and his own brothers Solomon and Martin. Together, they began the perilous work of building an insurrectionary force. The plan they devised was breathtaking in its audacity and military sophistication. It was not a spontaneous riot, but a coordinated coup d'etat aimed at the heart of Virginia's power structure. The strategy called for a multi-pronged attack on Richmond to be launched on the night of August 30th, 1800. A small advance party would slip into the city's lower districts, which were predominantly constructed of wood, and set them ablaze. The ensuing fire would act as a diversion, drawing the city's white inhabitants into a frantic battle against the flames, causing chaos and scattering their potential resistance. Meanwhile, the main rebel force, numbering in the hundreds, would first move against the white residents in their own neighborhood of the Brook, and then swarm into the upper part of Richmond. Their primary objective was the Virginia State Armory and the Capitol Building, where thousands of muskets, cannons, and other weapons were stored. The conspirators knew that seizing this arsenal was the key to their success. It would transform their ragged band into a properly armed army. A critical part of the plan involved capturing Governor James Monroe himself, taking him hostage to use as a bargaining chip to negotiate for their universal emancipation. They believed that with the governor in their custody and the city's arsenal under their control, they could force the Commonwealth of Virginia to surrender to their demands for freedom. The practical work of preparation fell to the skilled artisans within the conspiracy. Gabriel, his brothers, and other blacksmiths set up a clandestine forge. There they performed a powerful act of symbolic alchemy. They took the scythe blades, tools of agricultural oppression used to harvest the crops that sustained the slave economy, and reforged them into weapons of liberation. Testimony later revealed they created as many as 12 dozen of these brutal swords. Jack Bowler fashioned 50 pikes by fixing bayonets to the ends of long poles, and Gabriel and Martin molded musket balls, while others worked to gather gunpowder. In a daring intelligence-gathering mission, Gabriel and 2 other men even managed to enter the Capitol building to survey the weapons they intended to capture, using keys obtained from a free black doorman who was later exonerated of any knowledge of the plot. Recruiting a large enough force while maintaining secrecy was the conspiracy's greatest challenge and gravest vulnerability. The recruiters fanned out across Henrico County and into at least 10 surrounding counties and the cities of Petersburg and Norfolk.
creating one of the most geographically extensive slave plots in American history. To persuade others to join, they used a mixture of inspiration and coercion. They spoke of the righteousness of their cause and invoked the spirit of the American and Haitian revolutions. Ben Woolfolk would later testify that Gabriel intended to march under a silk flag bearing the motto, "Death or Liberty," a direct and defiant echo of Patrick Henry's famous words. To assure recruits of their chances, they inflated their numbers, claiming anywhere from 500 to an impossible 10,000 men had already joined. Some were told that friendly forces, French troops, Quakers, Methodists, and even poor whites who owned no slaves would aid them or be spared. The conspiracy was a monumental undertaking, a testament to incredible organization and courage. But its vast scale also made it vulnerable. In a society where every enslaved person was a potential rebel, but also a potential informant, the sheer number of people involved meant that the secret could not be held forever. A vast network of freedom fighters has been established and a brilliant tactical plan is in place. Swords have been hammered from scythes and the date for the attack is set. But the very success of their recruitment has created a web of whispers that stretches across Virginia. The conspiracy is a ticking clock, and the authorities are about to hear its faint, terrifying tick. To discover the betrayal that unraveled the plot and the dramatic events of the night destined for the uprising, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
The final days of August 1800 were a period of unbearable tension for the conspirators. The leaders had spent the preceding week sending word to their dispersed forces, confirming that the attack was set for the night of Saturday, August 30th. Hundreds of enslaved men across central Virginia knew of the plan and were preparing themselves mentally and physically for a violent struggle that would either win them their freedom or bring about their certain death. They had placed their faith in Gabriel's leadership and in the strength of their collective numbers. Yet the very nature of their undertaking, a secret held by hundreds in a society designed to detect the faintest hint of dissent, meant that discovery was almost inevitable. The conspiracy's downfall would come not from a single failure, but from a perfect storm of betrayal and nature's fury. The first and most critical breach occurred on the very morning the rebellion was to begin. Two enslaved men owned by the Shepherd family, Pharaoh and Tom, overwhelmed by fear or perhaps hoping for reward, went to their master, Mosby Shepherd. They revealed the entire elaborate plot, informing him that the uprising was scheduled for that very night. Shepherd, a respectable citizen of Henrico County, was immediately shaken. He locked the two men in a room for their own safety and then rushed to pen a frantic letter to Governor James Monroe, detailing everything he had been told. The warning reached the governor, who, though initially skeptical of earlier rumors, could not ignore such a specific and credible threat. Monroe immediately ordered patrols to be sent out and began to mobilize the state militia, though the full and terrifying scale of the conspiracy was not yet understood. As the day progressed toward evening, the conspirators, unaware that they had been betrayed, began their final preparations. They gathered their handmade swords, pikes, and bullets, ready to move under the cover of darkness. But then a second, unforeseen catastrophe struck. Late in the afternoon, the skies over central Virginia darkened ominously. What began as a typical summer rain quickly escalated into one of the most violent storms in memory. James Callender, a journalist jailed in Richmond,
described it as the most terrible thunderstorm that I ever witnessed in this state. A torrential downpour lashed the countryside, and fierce winds howled. The rain was so heavy that it flooded creeks, washed out bridges, and turned Richmond's dirt streets into impassable quagmires. For the rebel leaders, this was a disaster. The storm made it physically impossible for their scattered forces to assemble at the designated rendezvous points. Roads were underwater, and streams had become raging torrents. A handful of men managed to gather, but it was clear that the coordinated attack was now impossible. Believing the storm to be the only cause of the delay, and still ignorant of Pharaoh and Tom's betrayal, Gabriel and his lieutenants made the fateful decision to postpone the uprising for 24 hours, to the night of Sunday, August 31st. This delay proved fatal to their cause. It gave Governor Monroe and the militia the one thing they desperately needed: time. While the rebels waited out the storm, the governor's patrols were already active. The combination of the delayed attack and the early warning allowed the authorities to begin a sweeping roundup of suspected conspirators. By the time the leaders realized their plan had been compromised, it was too late to launch any effective action. The conspiracy, so carefully built over months, collapsed in a single night. The state militia, now fully alerted, fanned out across the region, searching plantations and homesteads for the men whose names had been provided by the initial informants. Gabriel and Jack Bowler, the two most prominent leaders, managed to evade the first wave of arrests and disappeared into the countryside. But the net was closing fast. The rebellion had been stillborn, betrayed from within, and thwarted by a tempest that seemed almost biblical in its fury. But for the white authorities, the terror is just setting in. The sheer scale of the conspiracy reveals a level of organization and ambition that shatters any illusion of the enslaved population's docility. A wave of panic and brutal retribution is about to sweep across Virginia. To follow the manhunt for Gabriel and the grim fate of his followers in the state's merciless courts, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter. In the days and weeks following the collapse of the conspiracy, a palpable terror gripped the white population of Virginia. The revelation that a vast network of enslaved men had come perilously close to seizing Richmond and murdering its inhabitants in their beds sent a shockwave through the slaveholding society. Governor James Monroe, a revolutionary veteran who had fought for his own freedom, now found himself in the paradoxical position of suppressing a fight for liberty. The response was swift, systematic, and brutal. The machinery of the state was mobilized not just to punish the guilty, but to terrorize the entire enslaved population into submission and reassert the absolute power of the slaveholding elite. The legal process that awaited the captured suspects was a grotesque parody of justice, designed for maximum control and minimal deliberation. The accused were tried not before a jury of their peers, but in special courts of oyer and terminer. These tribunals, established by a statute dating back to 1692, were composed of 5 white justices who acted as both judges and jurors. There was no appeal, except directly to the governor himself. The standard for conviction was terrifyingly simple. To secure a death sentence, the state only needed to prove that an enslaved person had agreed to join the conspiracy. No overt act of rebellion was necessary. The intention itself was a capital crime. This meant that the trials focused overwhelmingly on the testimony of recruiters and the words spoken in secret meetings. The state's primary tool for dismantling the conspiracy was the strategic use of pardons. To uncover the full extent of the plot and secure convictions, magistrates offered full pardons to key conspirators who were willing to turn state evidence and testify against their comrades. Two men in particular became the prosecution's star witnesses, Ben Woolfolk and another enslaved man named Ben, who was also owned by Thomas Prosser. Their detailed testimonies, given to save their own lives, sent dozens of their fellow rebels to the gallows. The transcripts of these trials paint a harrowing picture of men being condemned to death based on the words of others who had been incentivized to betray them. In one particularly poignant and defiant moment, one of the accused reportedly told the court, "I have nothing more to offer than what General Washington would have had to offer had he been taken by the British and put to trial." This powerful invocation of the American revolutionary spirit, however, fell on deaf ears. The executions began in early September and continued for months. The condemned men were hanged in groups, a public spectacle intended to serve as a grim warning. Gabriel's brothers, Solomon and Martin, were among the first to be executed, hanged on September 12th and 15th, respectively. Meanwhile, a massive manhunt was underway for Gabriel himself. After his escape, he had managed to make his way down the James River and was discovered hidden aboard the schooner Mary, captained by a sympathetic white man named Richardson Taylor, who was attempting to help him flee. Gabriel was betrayed a final time by an enslaved man named Billy, or Will, aboard the vessel, who alerted authorities in Norfolk in hopes of a reward. Captured and returned to Richmond in irons, Gabriel was tried on October 6th. He refused to make a statement to the court, denying his captors the confession and submission they desired. He was found guilty and sentenced to hang. In a final act of solidarity, he asked that his execution be delayed so he could be hanged alongside others. The court agreed, and Gabriel Prosser was hanged on October 10th, 1800, the last of 26 enslaved men to be executed for their role in the conspiracy. In a final cruel irony, the state of Virginia reimbursed the slaveholders for the value of every executed man, paying out over $8,900 in total, transforming human beings into a line item in a budget for suppressing rebellion. The gallows have done their work, and Gabriel and his inner circle are dead. But the impact of the conspiracy reverberates far beyond the execution grounds. The near success of the plot has exposed the profound vulnerability of the slave system and has forced Virginia's leaders into a painful and hypocritical reckoning with their own revolutionary ideals. The political and social fallout from Gabriel's conspiracy will reshape the laws of the state and the nation. To understand the profound legacy of this failed rebellion, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
The hanging of Gabriel did not end the story of his rebellion. In many ways, it was only the beginning of its most consequential chapter. The shock waves from the conspiracy radiated outward from the gallows of Richmond, affecting the highest levels of American politics, influencing the nation's laws, and forcing a crisis of conscience among the Virginia elite. The event was not a contained local tragedy, but a national crisis that exposed the fundamental contradiction at the heart of the American experiment, the existence of slavery in a republic founded on liberty. The conspiracy erupted in the midst of one of the most vitriolic presidential campaigns in American history, the election of 1800 between President John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. The Federalist Party, seeking to discredit Jefferson's Democratic Republicans, immediately seized upon Gabriel's plot as a political weapon. They argued that the Republican rhetoric of equality and its fervent support for the French Revolution had inspired the enslaved to seek a bloody liberty of their own. Newspapers aligned with the Federalists portrayed the conspiracy as the direct and inevitable consequence of the radical democratic ideals championed by Jefferson.
This political firestorm ensured that the rebellion was not just a Southern horror story, but a national debate that forced the entire country to confront the volatile nature of its slaveholding institutions. Within Virginia, the aftermath was marked by a complex and conflicted response. Governor James Monroe, who had overseen the suppression, found himself deeply troubled by the scale of the executions. As a man who had fought in the Revolution, he was uncomfortably aware of the hypocrisy in executing men for seeking the very liberty he had taken up arms to secure. He corresponded with Thomas Jefferson, then Vice President, about the dilemma. Jefferson, while affirming the need to maintain order, expressed a sentiment that was gaining traction among Virginians. There is a strong sentiment that there has been hanging enough. The world at large will forever condemn us if we indulge a principle of revenge. This unease led Monroe to pardon 13 of the convicted men and acquit 25 others, but the primary response of the state government was one of harsh repression, not soul-searching reform. When the Virginia General Assembly met following the rebellion, its members moved swiftly to ensure that such a plot could never again take root. The result was a series of new draconian laws known as the Black Codes of 1801. These laws were designed to systematically strip away any avenue of autonomy or potential organization within the black population, both enslaved and free. They placed further restrictions on the education, assembly, and movement of enslaved people. Critically, the laws also targeted the growing class of free blacks, who were seen as a dangerous and destabilizing influence. The Assembly debated calls to end private manumissions entirely and to deport all free black people from the state, though these most extreme measures were not enacted at the time. The state also formally adopted transportation, selling convicts out of the state, as an alternative to capital punishment for some enslaved offenders, a measure intended to reduce the financial loss to slaveholders from executions while still removing troublemakers. The political and legal reaction to Gabriel's conspiracy cemented the hardening of the slave system, pushing Virginia towards a more rigid and defensive posture that would characterize the antebellum period. The state has responded with tighter chains and harsher laws, but the spirit of rebellion has not been extinguished. The memory of Gabriel's bold plan continues to inspire others, proving that the desire for freedom cannot be legislated away. Within 2 years, a new conspiracy, led by a follower of Gabriel, will rise from the ashes of the first, proving that the terror for white Virginians is far from over. To learn about the Easter Plot of 1802 and the enduring legacy of resistance, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
The execution of Gabriel and his 25 compatriots was meant to be the final, terrifying period at the end of a sentence of rebellion. For the slaveholding class, it was a necessary act of extermination, designed to kill not only the men, but the very idea they represented. Yet, ideas are resilient, and the thirst for freedom is not so easily quenched. The legacy of Gabriel's conspiracy did not fade with the last crack of the hangman's rope. Instead, it seeped into the soil of Virginia, becoming a potent seed for future resistance and a permanent specter haunting the American conscience. The story of Gabriel was not over. It was simply entering a new, more enduring phase. The first and most direct echo of Gabriel's rebellion came just 2 years later, in the Easter Plot of 1802. The conspiracy was led by a man named Sancho, a ferryman from Amelia County who had been involved in Gabriel's original plan and had miraculously escaped capture. As a ferryman, Sancho possessed a mobility similar to Gabriel's, allowing him to travel and recruit across a wide area of southern Virginia and northeastern North Carolina.
His plan was reportedly more decentralized than Gabriel's, relying on a smaller, more dedicated group of followers. However, like its predecessor, the plot was betrayed by an informant before it could be launched. Sancho and 4 other men, Absalom, Frank, Martin, and the informant Abram, who was also ultimately convicted based on other testimony, were captured, tried, and hanged on May 15, 1802. The swift suppression of Sancho's plot demonstrated both the enduring desire for freedom and the heightened state of paranoid vigilance that Gabriel's conspiracy had instilled in the authorities. The rebellion had a long, bloody shadow. The memory of Gabriel continued to inspire acts of resistance for decades. The most famous and successful slave rebellion in American history, Nat Turner's uprising in Southampton County, Virginia, in 1831, was directly connected to this legacy of insurrection. Turner and his followers, who managed to kill about 60 white people before being suppressed, put into action the very plans that Gabriel had conceived: a violent, armed insurrection aimed at striking terror into the heart of the slaveholding regime. In the aftermath of Turner's revolt, white Southerners looked back with dread to the near miss of 1800, seeing it as a precursor to the bloodshed they had just experienced. The political and legal reaction to Turner was even more severe, leading to the formal prohibition of teaching enslaved people to read or write and a further tightening of the brutal slave codes. Gabriel's dream of a mass uprising had proven to be a persistent and realistic nightmare for the slaveholding South. Ultimately, the true significance of Gabriel's conspiracy lies in what it revealed about the American nation. It laid bare in the most dramatic terms possible the fundamental hypocrisy of a republic of slaveholders. The rebels had taken the revolutionary rhetoric of the founding generation, the language of Washington, Jefferson, and Henry, more seriously than the founders themselves were willing to apply it. The conspirators' intended motto, "Death or Liberty," and the defendant's statement comparing himself to General Washington were not just poignant moments, they were profound indictments of the entire system. The event forced a national conversation about slavery at the very moment the country was being formed, a conversation that was ultimately suppressed through violence and stricter laws, but which never truly disappeared. Gabriel's rebellion was a failure in its immediate objective, but a profound success as a symbol. It demonstrated that the enslaved were not passive victims, but active agents of their own liberation, capable of sophisticated organization, strategic thinking, and immense courage. It proved that the desire for freedom was inextinguishable. The conspiracy stands as a tragic, heroic, and pivotal moment in American history, a bloody harvest in Virginia that sowed the seeds for the much greater conflict to come, a civil war that would finally, and at a cataclysmic cost, answer the question that Gabriel had dared to pose with his sword and his life. The story of Gabriel's conspiracy is a journey into the heart of America's greatest contradiction. It is a tale of brilliant strategy and tragic betrayal, of revolutionary ideals twisted into tools of oppression, and of an unquenchable hunger for freedom that no gallows could erase. The echoes of the rebellion in 1800 would resonate through the Nat Turner uprising and into the Civil War, proving that some defeats are more powerful than victories. If you're drawn to the deepest and most dramatic stories of history, to the moments where the fate of a nation hangs in the balance, then your search for understanding continues with us. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We are always exploring the darkest corners of history and the human experience.